Gigantic machinery that was the Roman legion, the Velites were a small but vital piece. And also, the most disposable. They were the youngest, the poorest, and those who were placed on the front line just before the real fighting began. Their mission? To harass the enemy, launch projectiles, and take the first hits. In modern terms, they were Rome's human shields. The Velites were part of the light infantry during the Republic, before the Roman army became professionalized. They did not have the prestige of the legionaries nor the protection of the heavy maniples. In fact, many did not even have armor. Their equipment was simple: a short sword, gladius, a small shield, parma, and several javelins, light javelins designed to harass the enemy from a distance. They were recruited from among the youngest and landless citizens. We are talking about young men who had barely reached the minimum military age, many of them without experience and without resources. But they were also agile, fast, and easily replaceable. On the battlefield, the Velites deployed in front of the army, like a cloud of irritating mosquitoes. They threw their javelins to break enemy formations or disorganize the most dangerous units. Like elephants or heavy cavalry, and then they would run away to make way for the heavy troops, hastati, princes, and triarii. His role was as dangerous as it was necessary. And yet they rarely appear in heroic tales. They didn't conquer cities. They didn't make speeches. They just survived, or fell into oblivion. And you might ask yourself, how did someone like that fight? What hope did a boy with a javelin have against an enemy army? Velites did not wear armor. Not because of bravery, but because they couldn't afford it. While other Roman soldiers marched in bronze breastplates, greaves, and ornate helmets, the Velites wore only the bare minimum: a tunic, a small round shield called a parma made of wood and leather, and a simple bronze helmet, often decorated with a wolf skin to impress, and to at least make them look more intimidating than they were. And their main weapon? The javelin, a lightweight javelin designed to be thrown from a distance. They were not like the heavy pylons of the legionaries, but more manageable weapons that allowed them to move quickly. Each Velite carried between 5 and 7 javelins. The tactic was simple: get close enough to the enemy to launch their missiles, cause as much chaos as possible, and then run away before they could get over them. And it was not just a saying. These young fighters often faced the most brutal of the enemy: war elephants, chariots, hostile cavalry, or uncontrolled barbarian troops. They opened the fight, and often did not live to see the end. But their role was not just to be cannon fodder. In well-coordinated battles, Velites were the first layer of a complex strategy. Their mobility made them useful for scouting, harassing from a distance, testing enemy morale, and even finishing off the wounded after heavy legionaries had passed by. They weren't useless. They were a tactical tool. Only Rome considered them as functional as they were disposable. And this is where the big question comes in. Were they silent heroes, or simply expendable? That the Velites were human shields is not an exaggerated metaphor, it is quite literal. Imagine entering the battlefield knowing you'll be the first to see the enemy, the first to attack, and probably the first to die. That was the fate of the Velites. In each clash, they deployed in front of the Roman army like a thin line that had to hold out long enough to make way for the real heavyweights. And they weren't just facing soldiers. On many occasions, Velites were the only line of defense against war elephants, used by enemies such as Pyrrhus or Hannibal. These animals could destroy entire formations, so the Romans threw the Velites as bait. They would rush to the front, throw javelins at them to scare or wound them, and then run away hoping the elephants would get out of control before reaching the legions. Did it work? Sometimes it did. Sometimes not. And not to mention clashes with enemy chariots or heavy cavalry, the Velites had to disorder them, break their formation, and then sacrifice himself if necessary to slow them down until the main line was ready. The concept behind its use was brutally pragmatic. It is better to lose inexperienced young people than trained legionaries. And that tells us a lot about how the Roman military machine fought. Now, not everything was misery and death. There was one thing Rome did offer the Velites: a chance. A chance to rise. Velite was playing roulette with life. But for some, that dangerous front line wasn't just a punishment, but an opportunity. In Republican Rome, the army was not only an instrument of war, it was also a social step. And although the Velites started at the bottom, there was a way out: merit on the battlefield. If you survived enough campaigns, if you demonstrated courage, obedience, and skill, you could rise to the rank of hastatus, a better equipped and more highly regarded heavy infantryman. And from there, keep moving up: princeps, triarius, and even, with luck and years, you could become a centurion. For young men without land or inheritance, the army was one of the few avenues to glory, loot, and status. Rome rewarded courage, but only if you lived to tell the tale. Of course, for every Velite that rose, there were dozens that simply disappeared, buried in distant fields, nameless, unrecognized. They were replaced by other young people who were just as desperate, just as expendable. And yet, many accepted it. Because in a society that venerated military virtue and despised passivity, dying for Rome even as a Velite was better than doing nothing for it. But over time, this system, so marked by social class and personal merit, began to change. And one day, the Velites simply disappeared from the army. For almost 2 centuries, the Velites were a key piece in the Roman Republican army. But suddenly, they disappeared. What happened to them? The answer lies in the military reform of Gaius Marius, around 107 BC, a turning point in the history of the Roman army. Until then, only citizens who could afford their own equipment could enlist in the various units according to their social class. But Mario changed the rules of the game. He opened the army to the poorest, provided them with state weapons, eliminated the old class structure, and created a professional legion. The result? Roles like that of the Velites no longer made sense. Troops became more homogeneous, with standardized training and equipment. The mobility and harassment previously carried out by the Velites was now the responsibility of other, more specialized units, such as light auxiliaries or scouts. Furthermore, in a professional army, there was no point in throwing inexperienced young people around as cannon fodder. Now they were all full-time soldiers, with more uniform training and a life dedicated to military service. Thus, little by little, the Velites ceased to be mentioned in the records. They vanished like many other transitory units in Roman military history. No ceremonies, no tributes, no epic tombs. They simply stopped being necessary. And with them, a stage also came to an end. That of the poor boys who risked their lives for a small shield, a javelin, and a dream of advancement in the most ruthless machinery of the ancient world.